Chapter 2 Indians. Jolting along in the old covered wagon on the trail to Laramie, the Rouse brothers did not talk much. Elliot had to handle the horses with alert firmness. Lisha sat beside him on the high wagon seat or sometimes got down to run alongside to keep his legs exercised. They drove through lonely country. Small bands of Indians lurked in the draws. Buffalo grazed the prairie grass. A wide and lonely country, this western America. Lisha thrilled to a sense of impending adventure, of big and important things about to happen, of danger and desperate encounters with who knew what. Do you remember we heard in North Platte that drivers are needed for the central division of the great overland stages? Lisha turned to Elliot. That'd be real living. Elliot spoke without removing his pipe from his mouth. Seems to me I did hear something about a shortage of drivers. Must be the war. He frowned at Lisha. Here they use real young fellas sometimes. Most dangerous thing a man can do lawfully, I reckon. Yes, I know. Lisha settled down to his own thoughts again. Maybe since he had just passed his 16th birthday, they'd give him a job. After all, what did a man's life amount to if he couldn't face danger and adventure? They found Fort Laramie buzzing with rumors and feverish excitement. News of fresh gold strikes at Elk City, Orfino, and Florence in the Idaho country had filled the place with unrest. Although much of Wyoming and the vast Northwest had been reserved under treaty for the Indians, the white men pressing into the alluring West had little regard for the Indians' hunting grounds and often acted as though no treaty existed. Many immigrants who had started for California abandoned their original plans just as Lisha and Elliot had done. They crowded Laramie now with eager plans and determined action. Neither the slowness of travel nor the danger and difficulty of the trail discouraged the gold-hungry men in their first frenzy over a new gold strike in the mysterious West. In Laramie, Lisha and Elliot bought Western clothes, new buckskin jackets and pants, and high-crowned, wide-brimmed hats. The men who sold the clothes asked, "You fellas new here?" "Yes, we just drove our wagon in yesterday," Elliot said. "We came from North Platte." The man looked Elliot over with new respect. "You mean you drove all alone? Not on a wagon train?" "We came by ourselves." The man reached his hand across the counter. "You can't know how lucky you are. Didn't you see any Indians?" Elliot shook his head. "Well, don't do it again. Don't go venturing out by yourselves. Not many live to tell the story of such foolishness." The man wrapped up the old homespun clothes. "It's dangerous for whites to pass through the Indian territory. If they get if they had caught you, they would have burned your wagon and left your bones by the trail." Elliot took a job at the post while Lisha spent a few days looking around and studying the people, especially those around the stagecoach station. One day, Lisha overheard some men talking about someone named McClellan. From the conversation, he concluded that the man must be a stagecoach driver. Lisha looked him up and entered into conversation with him. He helped him with his horses and with loading his stage. "How old are you, kid?" McClellan asked him. Lisha drew himself up to his full height. 16, he said, and hoped he knew the reason why McClellan had asked. "Big boss needs men badly, kid. Why don't you try to get on as a stagehand, or maybe a driver? You're right-handed with horses. You're quick and tough. I'd like nothing better. Lucia felt a thrill of excitement stir in his middle. Come with me. I'll take you to Slade. Lisha caught his breath. Slade? Must be Joseph A. Slade, superintendent of the Central Division. He trembled with eagerness. The superintendent looked him over with interest. McClellan spoke up. He's a likely kid, Joe. Quick and smart. And I reckon he's not afraid of anything. Where are you from, son? Originally from Michigan. Lisha looked the great man straight in the eye. But I've lived in Franklin County, Minnesota for the last 9 years. Slade studied the youth for a long time before speaking. Lisha began to be embarrassed under the man's searching gaze. He knew that Slade would estimate his age. He was still a lot shorter than Elliot. He also knew that the Civil War had begun to affect even these remote places. Dependable men were hard to get. Then the superintendent began to talk to Lisha as a father talks to his son, with earnest kindness. I can give you a job, son, but I wonder if I should. You might not live to enjoy it very long. He watched Lisha's face. Our overland stages, later bought by Wells Fargo, run through 600 miles of the most dangerous and lonely trails in America. Few white settlers live there, and wild Indians roam the whole length and breadth of the region. The more Joseph Slade talked, the more Lisha wanted that job, and he knew that his eagerness must show on his face. Some parts of the stage route, Slade went on, are overrun by wild, reckless men who live by their pistol and bowie knives. We call them road agents, and robbing a stagecoach is everyday adventure for them, their pleasure and their profit. He paused and continued to study Lisha. I take it you know how to handle horses. Lisha caught at the glimmer of hope he detected in the kind voice. I don't know much of anything else, he replied. Well, son, I'll give you a job if you want it. Maybe I'll regret it, but I'm desperate. Again, he looked Lisha over for a time. I have a few rules that you must promise to obey. First, no drinking. Stay out of saloons. Second, don't get in fights. Men out here fight with guns and knives, and they fight to kill. He hesitated. On the other hand, don't let anyone run over you. There'll be times when you must take a stand, and such times be quick and accurate, and try to foresee what the other fellow's next move is going to be. Joseph Slade looked down at Lisha with kindness in his eyes. You still want the job? Thanks a lot, Mr. Slade. When do I start? Some of Slade's competitive men taught Lisha to repair harnesses. They taught him to set the iron rims on the wooden wagon wheels. An experienced blacksmith showed him how to shoe horses. Then Slade sent him to a station managed by an old-timer in the West, Uncle Rube. Lisha discovered that he had not known much about the stagecoach business, but he did know about horses. Here at the lonely stage stop, he learned fast. His heart always quickened at the sight of the stage coming round the curve. Its 6 horses in full gallop, while the stage bounced and swayed over the rough trail. Uncle Rube showed him how to unhitch the tired horses and hitch fresh ones to the stage in the fastest way possible, while the driver and his passengers rested for a few minutes. Then, with a flourish and a shout, They rattled off again in a cloud of dust or a spatter of mud according to the prevailing weather. Since hay cost a great deal, Lisha grazed the horses on the prairie grass. Before time for the stage to arrive, he brought them in, fed them some grain, and curried and harnessed them. When the stage whirled into the yard, he had the fresh horses all ready to hook up in a hurry. Late one afternoon, just before sunset, Lisha noticed a cloud of dust far down the trail. He called Uncle Rube's attention to it. Old man studied the dust cloud for a moment. Indians, he said. How can you know when they are so far away? Son, when you've lived with danger as long as I have, you'll just know. Uncle Rube contemplated the approaching menace at an instant longer. Those thieving Indians are after the horses, and they won't mind scalping us and burning the relay station. He ordered Lisha to bring in the horses, harness them, lead them into the thicket, and tie them there. Now Uncle Rube began loading his weapons. When they don't find the horses, they'll burn the station. They gathered up the rifles, pistols, and ammunition and took up a covered position not far from the buildings. Uncle Rube showed Lisha where to stand. Now, when they open up on them, we'll shoot. Then jump about 4 feet and shoot again as quick as we can. Make them think there are a lot of us. Lisha stood waiting. He saw that Uncle Rube had no compunction about shooting Indians. To him, they were a bunch of pesky varmints. He often said that dead Indians were the only good ones he'd ever seen. Now Lisha heard the pounding hooves of the Indian ponies. Darkness drew down fast. Indians stormed the corral, and finding no horses there, they turned to the station with wild howls and brandishing of firebrands. Lisha held his breath with excitement. Yes, they had set the place on fire. He remembered the rain had fallen a few days back and hoped the flames wouldn't start a prairie fire. He wondered why Uncle Rube didn't shoot. Then Uncle Rube gave the signal, and Lisha knew that his hands on the rifle lacked something in being as steady as he wished. Just as he leveled it and aimed, he heard a loud report right in his ear. He jumped to the right about 4 feet and leveled his gun again. Another report came from Uncle Rube's gun, and Lisha jumped again. He had jumped back and forth several times before he realized that he had not fired a shot. When he did begin to shoot, the skirmish quickly ended. The Indians rode away from the burning building and melted it into the night. The hoofbeats of their ponies mingled with the night noises of the prairie and vanished in the distance. Uncle Rube seemed much pleased that they had saved the horses, and when they found a dead Indian, he acted hilarious. We got one of the varmints, he explained, and went to get his shovel. Lisha had never seen a dead looked on a dead man before. Even an Indian stretched out in death impressed him in a way so profound that he couldn't shake it off. The licking flames threw strange light on the young buck's face, and Lisha hoped that Uncle Rube's bullet, but not his, had killed him. That night, as they lay out under the stars, with the horses grazing near them, Lisha couldn't help wondering where the young Indian had gone. Somehow, horse stealing didn't seem a sin terrible enough to roast a young fella in hell for thousands of years. The thought bothered him. He couldn't shake it off. He supposed the Bible taught everlasting hell. He'd heard many a sermon about it back in Minnesota. Alicia got a transfer to a swing station, a stop for passengers to get out and stretch while the driver watered his horses and gave them a little time to rest. They always kept a few horses at the swing station in case a horse should become sick or lame and have to be replaced. Lisha must see that the fresh drinking water stood ready and waiting when the stagecoach rolled in. One day he carried fresh water from the spring and filled a barrel as he always did. The stage came flashing in at high speed. The driver drew up with a flourish. He got down from his high seat, grabbed a dipper, and took some water from the barrel. With an oath, he spat out the water and pushed the barrel over, dumping the water on the ground. "You stupid kid!" He loosed a string of abusive words on Lisha. "Now fill that barrel with water that's fit to drink." Lisha put out his hand to take the water bucket when the leathery hand reached when a leathery hand reached over his shoulder and took it from him. He looked up into the angry face of Joseph Slade. Slade handed the bucket to the surprised driver. "Here, you emptied the barrel. Now fill it." Lisha watched Slade, with drawn pistol, supervise the filling of the barrel to the brim. He realized now that only a tough, strong man like Joseph Slade could manage a stagecoach line with success in this wild and lawless country. Lisha also learned that first winter what Joseph Slade had meant when he said that the road agents forced their way with guns and knives. He saw one duel where the contenders fought with double-barreled shotguns. Viewing the resulting corpse, Lisha thought again of how quickly this young adventurer had been snatched into eternity, and he wondered again about hell and what happens after a man dies. Late in the winter, Lisha decided that he would go back and see Elliot. Through the deep snow now he rode back to Laramie and found Elliot as glad to see him as though he had been gone for years. "Well, Lish, you've most grown up." Elliot looked at him with a stern expression he remembered so well. "What do you think of the West now?" "There's gold to be had in those mountains, Elliot." Lisha had resisted the gold fever through the first part of the winter, but now as he and Elliot recounted all the fabulous stories, they found themselves struck with the same urge that afflicted every man in the West. "We'll sell the ponies," Elliot said, ready to head out and find his fortune. "Oxen are much better. Indians don't steal them. They hold up better on the long trails, and we can turn them out to graze and be sure of finding them in the morning." As soon as the snow began to melt from the trails, the two Rouse brothers struck off alone on the trail from Fort Laramie to the gold fields in Idaho.